The waitress slipped the Vampire King a note. "Don't drink it. Leave now." He grabbed her hand and said, "Come with me, if you want to survive." The Cathedral of Velara shimmered with ancient decadence. Stained glass windows stretched toward vaulted ceilings, their crimson and gold fragments casting jeweled light across the stone floor. Candelabras blazed with 1,000 flames, illuminating faces too pale, too perfect, too still. A choir hummed hymns older than memory in the shadows, while nobles draped in velvet and silk moved like ghosts between banquet tables laden with crystal goblets filled with vitae, blood aged in silver casks, swirling with flecks of gold. Tonight was the Royal Blood Gala, a celebration of eternity. The vampire court had gathered to honor 5 centuries of Lucien Draven's reign, and the immortal aristocracy had come to witness their king toast to another age of dominance. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. At the head of the grand table sat Lucien Draven himself, the Vampire King. He wore midnight black, his tailored coat embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight like captured starlight. His white hair fell in waves past his shoulders, stark against the darkness of his attire, and his eyes, crimson as fresh spilled blood, surveyed the room with a gaze that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. He looked every bit the immortal sovereign, regal, untouchable, eternal. Yet beneath the perfect composure there was something else, a weariness in the set of his jaw, a distance in those ancient eyes, centuries of power, of bloodshed, of watching everything mortal crumble to dust. He had built this kingdom on fear and loyalty, but lately, both felt hollow. Even surrounded by his court, Lucien Draven stood alone. At the edge of the great hall, Alara Vance moved silently through the crowd. A silver tray balanced on one hand, her white servant's blouse pressed and spotless, her red apron a vivid slash of color against the gothic gloom. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple braid, neat and unassuming, but her eyes, hazel and sharp, held something the nobles never bothered to notice: fear, urgency, purpose. She was not supposed to be here. She was a mortal from the outskirts of Valenhold, hired for the night alongside a dozen other humans to serve the immortals. It paid well enough to keep her small cottage heated through winter, but tonight everything had changed. She had a younger brother waiting in the servants' quarters, his drawings scattered across a wooden bench while he waited for her shift to end. She had promised him she would return safely, but safety was no longer an option. Moments earlier, Alara had been refilling decanters in the preparation chamber when she heard voices, low, clipped, conspiratorial. She had frozen behind a marble column as 2 figures in Chancellor's robes spoke in hushed tones. A name, a plan, a vial. Veritas toxin. Enough to reduce even an ancient vampire to ash. And the target, Lucien Draven. She had watched, breathless, as a gloved hand poured the silver liquid into the royal decanter, the one marked with the king's personal sigil. Then they had left, and Alara had been alone with the poisoned wine, and a choice that should never have been hers to make. Now, her hands trembled slightly as she moved through the crowd, weaving past nobles who looked through her as if she were furniture. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Lucien had just risen from his seat, the poisoned goblet gleaming in his hand. A toast was coming. The entire court would raise their glasses, and the king would drink. Alara moved faster, slipping between bodies, her pulse roaring in her ears. Just as Lucien lifted the crystal glass to his lips, Alara reached him. She let herself stumble, just slightly, letting the corner of her tray catch the edge of his sleeve. The goblet tilted. Dark vitae splashed across the white tablecloth, droplets speckling his coat. Gasps rippled through the hall. Lucien turned sharply, his crimson eyes locking onto hers with a gaze that could freeze blood. "Forgive me, your majesty," Alara gasped, setting down her tray and pulling a cloth from her apron. She dabbed at his sleeve with trembling hands, murmuring apologies, every movement awkward and hurried. And with her other hand, hidden beneath the cloth, she pressed a small folded note into his palm. She didn't wait for his reaction. She backed away, still bowing, still apologizing, and disappeared into the crowd before anyone could stop her. Lucien stood motionless, the ruined goblet dripping onto the floor. His fingers closed around the note, warm from her touch. Slowly, he unfolded it beneath the table, his expression unreadable. 4 words stared back at him in hurried, mortal handwriting. "Don't drink it. Leave now." The words hit like a blade between his ribs. His breath, something he had not needed for centuries, caught. He looked up at the hall, at the faces that had just been smiling and toasting his name. But now everything has shifted. The glances felt sharper, the laughters colder. The air was thick with something he had not felt in decades. Danger. Someone in this room wanted him dead, and a mortal girl with trembling hands had just saved his life. Lucian's gaze swept the room, searching for the girl who had vanished into the shadows, but she was gone. And in her absence, the weight of the note pressed against his palm like a burning coal. He had ruled for 5 centuries. He had survived wars, betrayals, and the slow erosion of his own humanity. But this quiet act of defiance from a mortal he did not know, unraveled something inside him. Who was she? And why had she risked everything to warn him? The answers would come soon enough. But first, he had to survive the night. Lucian's hand moved with deliberate slowness as he set the ruined goblet back on the table. The hall had fallen silent, every immortal eye fixed on their king. The spilled vitae pooled across the white linen like a crimson stain spreading through snow. He could feel the weight of their attention. Curiosity, confusion, and beneath it all, something darker. Calculation. "My apologies," Lucian said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the cathedral. Calm, controlled, revealing nothing. It seems even kings are not immune to clumsy servants. A few polite laughs rippled through the crowd, but they were hollow, nervous. He let his gaze drift across the faces before him. Nobles who had served him for centuries, counselors who had sworn oaths in blood, chancellors who had knelt at his coronation. One of them wanted him dead. Perhaps more than one. From the shadows near the dais, Lord Maelric stepped forward. The chancellor was tall and angular, his silver hair swept back from a face that had forgotten how to age. He wore robes of deep burgundy trimmed in black, and his smile was as sharp as a blade. "Your Majesty," Maelric said smoothly, raising his own goblet. "Shall we prepare a fresh glass? The toast must continue. The court awaits your words." His tone was gentle, almost paternal, but Lucian heard the edge beneath it. The insistence, the urgency. Lucian met his gaze and held it. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Lucian smiled, cold and empty. "No," he said softly. "I find myself unwell. The weight of 5 centuries, perhaps." He turned to the assembled nobles, his voice rising just enough to command the room. "Forgive me, but I must ask for a brief recess. The celebration will resume shortly. Please continue to enjoy the evening." Murmurs spread through the hall like a slow-burning fire. Confusion, suspicion. Lucian ignored them all. He descended from the dais, his movements unhurried, every step projecting absolute authority. But his mind raced. As he passed the nearest servant station, he let his gaze flicker toward the crowd, and there, half hidden behind a column, he saw her, the girl. Her hazel eyes were wide, her hands clasped tightly together as if praying. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the stone itself. Lucian paused as if noticing her for the first time. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Ilara flinched. Every head turned. "The one who spilled my drink. Come with me." Her face went pale. "Your Majesty, Now." 2 guards materialized at his side, their hands resting on the pommels of silver-bladed swords. Ilara's breath hitched, but she stepped forward, her legs unsteady. Lucian did not wait for her. He turned and strode toward the side corridor, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. The guards flanked Ilara, herding her after him. Behind them, the murmurs grew louder. Lord Maelric watched from the dais, his expression unreadable. But Lucian felt the Chancellor's gaze like a knife between his shoulder blades. The private chamber was small and cold, lit only by a single candelabra on a stone table. Lucian closed the door behind them, the heavy wood sealing out the noise of the gala. The guards remained outside. It was just the 2 of them now. Ilara stood in the center of the room, trembling, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her body together. Lucian turned to face her, his crimson eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply studied her, this mortal girl who had risked everything to save him. "Who told you?" he asked finally, his voice low and deadly. Ilara swallowed hard. "No one, Your Majesty. Do not lie to me." He stepped closer, towering over her. "You slipped me a note warning me of poison. That knowledge is not something a servant stumbles upon by accident. Who told you?" "No one." Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze. "I saw it. In the preparation chamber. 2 men in Chancellor's robes. They poured something into your decanter. A silver vial. They said it was Veritas toxin. Enough to turn you to ash." Lucian went still. Veritas toxin. One of the few substances that could kill an ancient vampire. Rare, expensive, forbidden, and someone had managed to acquire it. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin. "You overheard this," he said slowly. "And your first instinct was to warn me? A vampire? A creature whose kind has oppressed yours for centuries?" Ilara's jaw tightened. "My first instinct was to not watch someone die when I could stop it. Even if that someone is you." There was no deceit in her voice. No hesitation, just raw, stubborn honesty. Lucian had lived long enough to know the scent of lies, the quickened heartbeat, the darting eyes, the tremor in the breath. This girl had none of it. She was terrified, yes, but she was telling the truth. He stepped back, his mind already working through the implications. If Alara had overheard the plot, then the conspiracy was not hidden in whispers and shadows. It was bold, organized, and it involved members of his own council. Lord Maelric. It had to be. The Chancellor had been the one insisting he drink, the one pushing for the toast to continue. You should have run, Lucian said quietly. The moment you saw what they were planning, you should have fled this place and never looked back. Alara lifted her chin, defiant despite the fear in her eyes. I thought about it, but I couldn't just let it happen. Something in her words struck him, a flicker of something he had not felt in decades. Respect. This fragile, mortal girl had more courage than half his court. She had stood in the shadow of monsters and chosen to act, and now, because of her, his life was his own. For the moment, before he could speak again, the door burst open. A guard stumbled in, his face pale, his armor clattering. Your Majesty, he gasped, breathless. Lucian turned sharply. What is it? The council is moving, sire. They've convened an emergency session. And the decanter? The guard hesitated, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. The decanter is empty. The poison is gone. Lucian's blood ran cold. And Lord Maelric? The guard's silence was enough. The Chancellor had vanished. The sound came first. Boots on stone, dozens of them, echoing through the corridor like thunder. Then voices, sharp and commanding, seal the exits. No one leaves the cathedral. Lucien moved to the chamber door, pressing his ear against the wood. Through the crack, he could see shadows moving in the hallway. Soldiers, not his personal guard. These wore the crimson sashes of the High Council, Maelric's men. The coup had already begun. Your Majesty? The loyal guard's voice was tight with fear. What are your orders? Lucian's mind raced. If Maelric had convened the council and disposed of the poison, then the narrative was already being written. The king had grown unstable, paranoid. He had disrupted the gala, assaulted a servant, and fled like a madman. And if Lucian returned to that hall now, they would have him arrested, or worse, executed under the pretense of protecting the realm. He turned to Alara, who stood frozen against the far wall. Do you know these tunnels? The servant passages beneath the cathedral. She blinked, startled. Ah, yes, some of them. They connect to the lower city. Good. Lucian crossed to the back wall, his fingers tracing the stone until they found a seam invisible to mortal eyes. He pressed, and a section of the wall groaned inward, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. Then you're going to guide us. Us? Alara's voice rose. You can't just... They will kill you if they find you with me, Lucian said flatly. You are a witness. A liability. So unless you wish to die in this room, I suggest you move. The corridor outside exploded with noise. Fists pounded on the door. Open in the name of the High Council. Alara looked at the door, then at Lucian, then at the gaping darkness beyond the secret passage. Her face was pale, but she nodded once. Go, Lucien said. She stepped through. Lucian turned to the loyal guard. Bar the door. Give us as much time as you can. The guard saluted, his hand over his heart. For the true king. Lucian disappeared into the passage. Behind him, the door splintered. The tunnels were older than the cathedral itself, carved from the bedrock when Velara had been nothing but a mortal settlement. The air was damp and cold, thick with the smell of earth and ancient stone. Alara led the way, one hand trailing along the wall to steady herself in the darkness. Behind her, Lucien moved in perfect silence, his crimson eyes glowing faintly, illuminating the path ahead. They're following us, he said quietly. Alara glanced back, her breath coming in short gasps. How do you know? I can hear their heartbeats. Smell their blood. He paused. They're close. A shout echoed down the tunnel behind them, distant but growing nearer. Alara's pace quickened, her feet stumbling over loose stones. There's a junction ahead, she said. 3 paths. The center one leads to the old catacombs. It's a maze down there. We could lose them. Then that's where we go. They reached the junction moments later, and Alara turned down the central passage without hesitation. But as they ran, Lucian raised his hand. Shadows peeled away from the walls like living things, coiling around his fingers. He whispered a word in a language older than empires, and the darkness obeyed. Behind them, the shadows thickened, forming shapes, figures that moved and breathed and ran in every direction. Illusions, dozens of them. The shouts of their pursuers grew confused, scattering. Footsteps echoed down the wrong tunnels. Lucian lowered his hand, and the shadows faded. That won't fool them for long, he said, but it will buy us time. Alara stared at him, her eyes wide. What are you? A king, he replied simply, and a monster, depending on who you ask. The catacombs stretched endlessly, lined with alcoves where the dead had once been laid to rest. Bones gleamed white in the faint glow of Lucien's eyes. The temperature dropped with every step, and Alara's breath came in visible clouds. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Lucien noticed. He said nothing, but he slowed his pace. "You're cold," he observed. "I'm fine. You're immortal. You're not built for this." Alara shot him a glare. "I'm still walking, aren't I?" Despite himself, Lucien almost smiled. Almost. They walked in silence for a time, the only sound the soft scrape of Alara's boots on stone. Then quietly she spoke. "My mother was a healer," she said, "in a village near the southern border. She taught me everything she knew, herbs, poultices, how to set bones, how to stop bleeding." Lucien glanced at her. "Was?" Alara's jaw tightened. 20 years ago, your kind raided the village. They burned the houses, took what they wanted. My mother tried to protect the children. They killed her for it. I was 4. The words hung in the cold air like a curse. Lucien stopped walking. "And yet you saved me." Alara turned to face him, her hazel eyes blazing. "I saved you because I'm not like them. I'm not like the monsters who took everything from me. I don't let people die when I can stop it. Even if they're—" She gestured at him, frustrated. "Even if they're you." Lucien stared at her, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Guilt, shame, admiration. For 5 centuries he had ruled through fear and power. He had built an empire on the suffering of mortals like her. And yet here she stood, trembling and exhausted, having risked everything to save the life of a creature whose kind had destroyed hers. "You are braver than I have ever been," he said quietly. Alara blinked, surprised. "I'm terrified. I know. That's why it's brave." Before she could respond, a sound echoed through the catacombs, a deep, grinding rumble that shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Lucien's head snapped up. "Run," he said. "What? Run!" He grabbed her arm and pulled her forward as the ceiling behind them exploded inward. Stone collapsed in a deafening roar, blocking the passage they had just walked through. The shockwave threw them both to the ground. Alara coughed, choking on dust, her ears ringing. Lucien was on his feet instantly, staring at the wall of rubble that now sealed the tunnel. His expression was dark. "That was no accident," he said. "Someone knew we would come this way." Alara pushed herself up, her hands scraped and bleeding. "How is that possible?" Lucien's crimson eyes glowed brighter in the darkness. "Because someone in my court has been planning this for far longer than tonight. They found shelter in the ruins of an old chapel, half buried beneath centuries of earth and forgotten by time. The stone walls were cracked and covered in moss, and a fractured stained glass window let in slivers of moonlight that painted the floor in fragmented colors." Alara collapsed against the wall, her chest heaving, her legs trembling from exhaustion. Lucien stood at the entrance listening. The catacombs behind them were silent now, but silence in the dark was never a comfort. "We can't stay long," he said, turning back to her. "They'll search every tunnel until they find us." Alara nodded, too breathless to speak. She pressed a hand to her side, wincing. Lucien's gaze sharpened. "You're hurt. It's nothing. Just bruised." She waved him off, but her pallor told a different story. Lucien crouched beside her, his movements impossibly graceful. "Let me see." "I said I'm fine." And I said let me see. Reluctantly, Alara lifted her hand. Her blouse was torn, revealing a dark bruise spreading across her ribs. Lucien's jaw tightened. "You could have broken bones, punctured a lung, but I didn't." She met his gaze, defiant even in exhaustion. "I'm still here, still breathing." For a moment, Lucien said nothing. Then he stood, moving to the broken altar at the center of the chapel. He sat heavily on the stone, and for the first time, he looked tired. Not physically. Vampires did not tire, but something deeper, worn, weary. "The Veritas toxin," he began quietly, "is one of the oldest and rarest poisons in existence. It was created centuries ago by alchemists who sought to kill the unkillable. A single drop can reduce an ancient vampire to ash within moments." He looked down at his hands, pale and unmarked. "I have survived wars, assassinations, rebellions, but that poison, it would have ended me as if I were nothing." Alara pulled herself upright, leaning against the wall. "Then why? Why would your own council try to kill you?" Lucien's laugh was bitter. "Because I have become a problem." He looked up at her, his crimson eyes shadowed. "For 5 centuries I ruled as they expected, with power, with dominance, with cruelty when necessary. Mortals existed to serve, to bleed, to fear. That was the natural order." He paused. "But I have grown, tired of it, tired of the blood, tired of the screams, tired of ruling over a kingdom built on suffering." Alara stared at him, something flickering in her expression. Understanding, or perhaps disbelief. I proposed a new covenant, Lucian continued. One where mortals and vampires could coexist, where blood would be given willingly, not taken by force, where humans were not cattle, but people. He shook his head. The council called it madness, weakness. They said I had forgotten what it meant to be a vampire, that I had become too human. His voice dropped. And perhaps they were right. Before Alara could respond, a sound cut through the silence, the scrape of boots on stone. Distant but growing closer. Lucian was on his feet instantly, his hand raised. Shadows coiled around his fingers, ready. "Stay behind me," he said. The footsteps quickened. Then came the hiss of steel being drawn. Lucian moved toward the entrance, but a figure burst through before he could reach it. An assassin clad in black, a silver blade gleaming in his hand. The assassin struck fast, but Lucian was faster. He caught the blade with his bare hand, his palm sizzling where the silver touched. But he did not flinch. With a sharp twist, he disarmed the assassin and drove him back into the tunnel with a blow that sent the man crashing into the wall. Two more appeared behind him. Lucian fought with inhuman speed, his movements a blur of shadow and fury. But one of the assassins threw something, a small blade, spinning through the air. Lucian dodged, but not fast enough. The silver dagger sank into his shoulder, burning through cloth and flesh. He staggered, hissing in pain. The assassins pressed forward. Alara didn't think. She grabbed a piece of broken stone from the floor and hurled it at the nearest assassin's head. It struck true and the man stumbled. Lucien seized the opening, driving his fist through the second assassin's chest. The third turned and fled. Silence fell again, broken only by Lucian's labored breathing. He slumped against the wall, blood, black and viscous, seeping from the wound in his shoulder. The silver dagger jutted from his flesh, smoking faintly. "Lucian!" Alara was at his side instantly. "Don't!" he rasped. "Silver! It burns!" "I know." She gripped the hilt of the dagger. "This is going to hurt." She pulled. Lucien's body went rigid, a sound of pure agony tearing from his throat. The blade came free, and more black blood spilled down his arm. Alara tossed it aside and pressed her hands to the wound, her fingers glowing faintly with warmth, a remnant of her mother's healing gift. "You shouldn't waste your strength," Lucian whispered. "Be quiet," Alara said firmly, "and let me work." She tore strips from her apron, binding the wound as best she could. The bleeding slowed, but Lucian's skin was pale, paler than usual, and his breathing shallow. "When was the last time you were hurt like this?" she asked quietly. Lucian's eyes fluttered. 200 years. Maybe more. I had forgotten what pain felt like. "Tell me something," Alara said, trying to keep him conscious. "About before you did this." Lucian's gaze drifted to the shattered window, where moonlight spilled through broken glass. "I was a boy once," he whispered, "in a village much like yours. I had a family, a sister. I wanted to be a scholar, to read and write and learn." His voice grew distant. "And then one night they came. Vampires. They took everything. And when I woke, I was one of them." Ilara's hand still. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago." But his voice cracked. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm still that boy, or if he died the night they turned me." Alara looked at him. This ancient king, this monster, this creature who had ruled for centuries, and she saw something she had not expected. Grief, loss, humanity buried beneath layers of immortality. "You saved me tonight," she said softly. "The boy you were with would have done the same." Lucian looked at her, something unreadable in his crimson eyes. "Perhaps." A whistle cut through the air, sharp and high. Lucian's head snapped toward the entrance. "They're signaling. More are coming." Alara helped him to his feet. "Can you move?" "I'll have to." But before they could take a step, an arrow sliced through the darkness and embedded itself in the chapel door with a heavy thunk. Then another. And another. A voice called from the tunnel beyond, cold and familiar. "Your Majesty." There is nowhere left to run. The assassins poured into the chapel like shadows given form. 6 of them, clad in black leather and silver mail, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved with supernatural grace, not human. Vampire-born hunters, trained by the council to kill their own kind. The leader stepped forward, lowering his hood. Pale skin, dark eyes, a face carved from cruelty. "Lord Maelric sends his regards," he said, drawing a silver longsword. "He wants you to know it's nothing personal." "Just necessary." Lucian pushed Alara behind him, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. "Maelric is a coward," he said, his voice steady despite the pain. "If he wanted me dead, he should have faced me himself." The assassin smiled. "He knew you'd say that. He also knew you'd run. You've grown soft, Your Majesty. Weak." His gaze shifted to Alara, hiding behind a mortal girl. "How far the great Lucian Driven has fallen. Leave her out of this. She's already in it." The assassin raised his blade. "Kill them both." They attacked as one. Lucien met the first blade with his bare hands, catching it despite the silver burning his palms. He twisted, snapping the sword in half and driving the broken end into the assassin's throat. But he was weakened, slower than usual. Another blade sliced across his back, and he stumbled. A third assassin lunged. Alara screamed, not in fear, but in fury. She threw herself between them, her arms outstretched. The blade meant for Lucian's heart pierced her chest instead. Time stopped. Alara's eyes went wide, shock rippling across her face. Blood, red, mortal blood, bloomed across her white blouse like a crimson flower. The assassin pulled the blade free and she collapsed. No, Lucian's voice was raw, broken. He caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against him. Her breath came in shallow, rattling gasps. Blood spilled from her lips. Alara, I'm sorry, she whispered, her hand weakly gripping his coat. I couldn't let them. Something inside Lucian shattered. Not his body, his soul. For 5 centuries, he had watched mortals die. He had caused their deaths. He had grown numb to it. But this girl who had saved him, who had risked everything, who had shown him what humanity looked like, she was dying in his arms, and it was unbearable. The assassins closed in. Lucian looked up at them, and for the first time in centuries, his crimson eyes burned not with power, but with rage. Pure, unfiltered fury. Get back, he snarled. Shadows erupted from his body like a storm, slamming into the assassins and hurling them against the walls. The chapel shook. Stone cracked. The leader tried to rise, but Lucian was already there, his hand wrapped around the man's throat. Tell Maelric, Lucian whispered, his voice colder than death, that I am coming for him. He crushed the assassin's windpipe and let the body fall. The others fled. Lucian didn't chase them. He turned back to Alara, dropping to his knees beside her. Her breathing was fading, her eyes losing focus. She had minutes, maybe less. Stay with me, he said, his voice breaking. Please. Can't. Her hand slipped from his coat. Lucian's mind raced. There was only one way to save her. One ancient, forbidden ritual that no vampire king had performed in over 1,000 years. The blood pact. A bond that tied 2 souls together. Life for life, death for death. If she accepted his blood, she would live. But she would no longer be entirely human, and if one of them died, the other would follow. He had sworn never to turn another mortal, never to inflict this curse on anyone. But as he looked at Alara's pale face, her life slipping away, he knew he had no choice. Forgive me, he whispered. He bit into his own wrist, black blood welling from the wound. Alara, listen to me. If you drink, you will live, but you will be bound to me. Forever. Our lives will be tied. Do you understand? Her eyes fluttered open, barely conscious. Will it hurt? Yes. A faint smile crossed her lips. Good, I'm tired. Of being afraid. Lucian pressed his wrist to her mouth. Then drink. She did. The effect was immediate. Her body convulsed, arching off the ground as his blood burned through her veins like liquid fire. Her scream echoed through the chapel, raw and agonizing. Lucien held her down, whispering words in the old tongue. Binding words, ancient and irreversible. Her chest wound began to close, the flesh knitting together with unnatural speed. Her pale skin grew paler still, taking on a faint luminescence. And her eyes, when they opened, were no longer hazel. They were silver. Bright, glowing silver. She gasped, her lungs filling with air that suddenly felt too sharp, too cold. Every sense heightened. She could hear Lucian's heartbeat. Slow, steady, ancient. She could smell the blood still staining her blouse. She could feel the bond between them, a thread of light connecting their souls. What did you do to me? Her voice was different, stronger. I saved you, Lucian said quietly. And damned us both. Alara sat up slowly, her hands trembling. She looked down at them, her fingers, her arms, her body. She felt different, stronger, but also hollow, as if something vital had been taken and replaced with something cold. I'm not human anymore. No, you're not. Lucian helped her stand. You're half-turned, between life and death. Neither mortal nor vampire. Alara's breath hitched. She should have been terrified. She should have screamed, or wept, or cursed him. But instead she felt power. It hummed beneath her skin, coiled and waiting. She looked at Lucian, and for the first time she truly saw him. Not as a king, not as a monster, but as something fragile and broken, bound to her now in ways neither of them could undo. If I die, she began. I die, Lucian finished. And if I fall, you follow. They stood in the ruined chapel, surrounded by bodies and broken stone, their fates intertwined by blood and desperation. The first rays of dawn crept through the shattered window, pale and ghostly. Lucien turned toward the light, his expression darkening. They're coming, he said quietly. I can feel them. The council's army. Dozens of them. Alara's new senses flared, and she felt it too. A pressure in the air, a weight closing in. What do we do? Lucian looked at her, his crimson eyes meeting her silver ones. We survive. Together. He took her hand, and she felt the bond pulse between them, warm and terrible and unbreakable. They won't stop until one of us is ash, he said. Then we make sure, Alara replied, her voice steady, that it's not us. They ran through tunnels that twisted deeper into the earth, away from the dawn and the army that hunted them. Lucian led the way, his hand never leaving Alara's, pulling her forward when her new strength faltered under the weight of what she had become. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern where an ancient monastery stood, half swallowed by stone and shadow. Its walls were crumbling, its windows empty sockets staring into darkness. But it was a shelter, and shelter was all they had. Inside, the air was thick with dust and centuries of silence. Broken pews lay scattered across the stone floor, and faded tapestries hung in tatters from the walls. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, painting everything in silver. Alara collapsed against a pillar, her chest heaving, not from exhaustion, but from hunger. It had started as they ran, a gnawing emptiness in her stomach that had nothing to do with food. Now it clawed at her insides, demanding, insistent. I can hear them, she whispered, her hands pressed to her temples. Heartbeats, everywhere. Above us, animals. People in the city. I can hear their blood moving through their veins. Lucian knelt beside her, his expression grave. The bloodlust. It's the first thing every new vampire feels. I'm not a vampire. Her voice was sharp, defensive. You're half-turned. Close enough. He reached out slowly, taking her hands in his. Listen to me, Alara. The hunger will never fully leave you. But you can control it. You must control it, or it will control you. How? Her silver eyes met his despair. By remembering who you are. By choosing humanity even when the monster inside you demands otherwise. He guided her breathing, teaching her the meditation techniques he had learned centuries ago, ways to quiet the hunger, to push it down into a manageable ache. You are not your appetite, he said quietly. You are not defined by what you crave. You are the choices you make despite it. Slowly, painfully, the hunger receded. Not gone, but distant enough to think about the past. Alara sagged against the pillar, exhausted. Is this what you live with? Every day? Every moment of every day, Lucian admitted. For 500 years. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw the weight he carried. I'm sorry, don't be. You didn't ask for this. I forced it on you. You saved my life. I cursed you with mine. They sat in silence for a time, the bond between them humming softly, a constant reminder of their shared fate. Then Alara spoke, her voice small. When I was 8, I watched your soldiers raid our village. They killed my mother because she tried to hide the children. They laughed while she bled. Lucian closed his eyes, shame washing over him. After that, I was sent to live with my aunt in the lower provinces. She was a healer too. She taught me that every life mattered, human or otherwise. That compassion wasn't weakness. Alara's voice hardened. But I also learned to hate. For years I hated your kind. I hated you, even though I'd never met you. I hated the castle, the nobles, the system that let monsters pretend to be royalty. And now? Lucian asked quietly. Now? She looked at their joined hands, his pale and hers glowing faintly with new power. Now I don't know what I feel. You're still one of them. But you're also not. Lucian's jaw tightened. Every raid, every death, every injustice, I carry the weight of it all. I told myself it was necessary. That it was the natural order. But the truth is I was afraid. Of what? Of admitting I was wrong. That my kingdom was built on suffering. That I'd become the very monster I once feared. He looked at her, his crimson eyes reflecting centuries of regret. You are braver than I ever was, Alara. You looked at a monster and chose mercy. I looked at my reflection and turned away. Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to hate him. It would be easier, but she couldn't. Not when she saw the cracks in his armor, the humanity he had buried but never lost. Maybe, she said softly, we're both just trying to be better than what the world made us. Lucian almost smiled. Perhaps. They rose together, exploring the monastery's ruins, dust-covered altars, crumbled statues of forgotten saints. And then, on the far wall, they found it, a mural, ancient and faded, but still visible. It depicted a figure wreathed in flames standing before a throne of shadow. Beneath it, words were carved in the old tongue. Lucian stepped closer, tracing the letters with his fingers. The mortal flame will break the eternal night, he translated. When blood and humanity are bound, the old order shall fall, and a new covenant shall rise. Alara moved beside him, staring at the image. The figure in flames had silver eyes. What does it mean? Lucian's expression was unreadable. It's a prophecy. One I thought was myth. He turned to her, something like wonder or fear flickering in his gaze. But your transformation, your silver eyes, the bond between us. It's all here. You're the mortal flame. That's impossible. Is it? He gestured to the mural. You saved me. You forced me to confront what I had become. You are mortal born but immortal touched. You are the bridge between our worlds. Alara shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm just a waitress. A healer's apprentice. I'm not. You are more than you know, Lucian interrupted gently. And whether you believe it or not, you have already begun changing the course of history. Before she could respond, a sound echoed through the monastery. Footsteps, rapid and uneven. They both spun toward the entrance as a figure stumbled through, cloaked and bloodied. A young vampire, barely more than a boy, his face pale with terror. Your Majesty, he gasped, collapsing to his knees. Lucian was at his side instantly. What happened? The messenger looked up, his eyes wide with despair. The council? They've crowned Lord Maelric. He sits on your throne. The court has sworn fealty to him. He swallowed hard. The throne is lost, Your Majesty. You are declared a traitor. Hunted. The entire kingdom believes you have fallen to madness. Alara felt the bond between them shudder, Lucian's anguish rippling through her like a physical blow. His kingdom. His throne. 5 centuries of rule, stolen in a single night. Lucian stood slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. Then let them believe what they will, he said quietly. Maelric has made his choice. Now I will make mine. He looked at Alara, and in his eyes she saw something new. Not despair. Determination. We take it back, he said. All of it. The messenger's name was Corvin, and he carried more than just news. Hidden beneath his cloak were stolen documents, maps of the palace guard rotations, lists of counselors who still harbored doubts about Maelric's sudden rise, and most importantly, the schedule for the coronation feast. 3 nights from now, Maelric would formally claim the throne in the same cathedral where Lucian had nearly been poisoned. The symmetry was deliberate, cruel. He wants to erase you, Corvin said, spreading the parchments across the monastery floor. Every painting, every record, every mention of your reign. He's telling the court you were a tyrant who lost his mind. Lucian studied the documents, his expression unreadable. And the nobles believe this? Some do, others are afraid. But there are still those loyal to you, Your Majesty. Captain Theron and his personal guard refuse to swear fealty. They've been confined to the barracks, but they're waiting, watching. Corvin's gaze shifted to Alara. If you return, they will follow. But it will be dangerous. Maelric has tripled the assassins. He knows you might come back. Then he's not as foolish as I hoped, Lucian said quietly. Alara stepped forward, her silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. I'm going with you. Lucian turned to her sharply. Absolutely not. You don't get to decide that anymore, she said, her voice firm. We're bound, remember? If you die, I die, which means I have just as much right to fight for our survival as you do. This isn't about survival. It's about reclaiming a throne. No. Alara met his gaze without flinching. It's about justice. You said it yourself. Maelric has built his rule on lies and murder. If you don't stop him, he'll turn your kingdom into exactly what you've been trying to change. Lucian wanted to argue, wanted to protect her, to keep her away from the bloodshed that was coming. But she was right. They were bound now, equals in life and death. And more than that, she was strong. Stronger than he had given her credit for. If we do this, he said slowly, you follow my lead. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Alara almost smiled. Says the man who walked into his own assassination. That was different. How? Lucian had no answer for that. They prepared in silence. Corvin provided servants' clothes. Simple black tunics and white aprons, identical to the uniforms worn by the palace staff. Alara braided her hair tightly and scrubbed the silver glow from her eyes with ash, dulling them to a pale gray. Lucian concealed his white hair beneath a dark hood and lowered his gaze to hide the crimson. Together, they looked unremarkable, forgettable, perfect. The feast begins at nightfall, Corvin explained. The cathedral will be filled with nobles and dignitaries. Maelric will enter last, crowned and robbed. That's when you'll make your move. And Captain Theron? Lucian asked. I'll get word to him. When he sees you, he'll know. Corvin hesitated. But Your Majesty, once you step into that hall, there's no turning back. Maelric will have you killed on sight if he can. Lucian's jaw tightened. Then I won't give him the chance. As they left the monastery, Alara reached for Lucian's hand, and he took it without hesitation. The bond pulsed between them, steady, unbreakable. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The cathedral of Valara blazed with light as they approached. Candles flickered in every window, and the sound of music and laughter spilled into the night. It looked exactly as it had 3 nights ago. Opulent, decadent, beautiful. But now to Alara it felt like a tomb. They slipped in through the servants' entrance, joining the flow of staff carrying trays and goblets. No one looked twice at them. Inside, the great hall was transformed. The same vaulted ceilings, the same stained glass, the same tables laden with vitae. But the faces were different, hungrier, more calculating. The nobles who had once bowed to Lucian now laughed and toasted to his downfall. At the head table sat Lord Maelric, draped in royal robes of black and crimson, a silver crown resting on his brow. He looked every bit the king, confident, commanding, victorious. Alara felt Lucian stiffen beside her, the bond thrumming with barely controlled rage. "Easy," she whispered. "Not yet." They moved through the crowd, serving wine, clearing plates, invisible among the chaos. But Alara's new senses were alive, cataloging everything. She spotted Captain Theron standing near the entrance, his hand resting on his sword hilt. His eyes scanned the room, searching, waiting. Lucian caught his gaze for just a fraction of a second. The captain's expression didn't change, but Alara saw his fingers tighten on the hilt. He understood. The music swelled as Maelric rose from his seat, raising his goblet. The hall fell silent. "My friends," Maelric began, his voice smooth and resonant. "Tonight we celebrate not just a new reign, but a return to the old ways. For too long our kind has been weakened by sentiment, by mercy, by a king who forgot what it meant to rule with strength." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But that era is over," Maelric continued. "I stand before you not as a usurper but as a savior, the true protector of vampire supremacy, and I vow to restore the glory that Lucian Draven nearly destroyed." He lifted the crown from his head, holding it aloft. "This crown does not belong to the weak. It belongs to those strong enough to claim it." And tonight, the great doors of the cathedral burst open. Wind howled through the hall, extinguishing half the candles. Shadows pooled at the entrance, coiling and shifting like living things. And then from the darkness a figure stepped forward, white hair cascading over black attire, crimson eyes burning like coals. Lucian Draven, the vampire king, walked into the light. The hall erupted in gasps. Nobles stumbled back, goblets crashing to the floor. Maelric's face drained of color, the crown slipping from his fingers. "Impossible," he breathed. Lucian's voice cut through the chaos, cold and absolute. "Did you really think," he said, his gaze locked on Maelric, "that you could kill me so easily?" Behind him, Alara stepped into the light, her silver eyes blazing. The hall went deathly silent. The dead king had returned, and he was not alone. The silence shattered like glass. Maelric recovered first, his shock twisting into fury. "Seize them," he roared, his voice cracking through the hall. "Guards, kill them both!" But the guards didn't move. Captain Theron stepped forward instead, his sword drawn, not against Lucian, but pointed at Maelric. Behind him, a dozen loyal soldiers followed, their blades gleaming in the candlelight. "The true king has returned," Theron said, his voice ringing clear, "and I will not raise my sword against him." Chaos erupted. Nobles scattered, some fleeing toward the exits while others pressed against the walls. Maelric's assassins emerged from the shadows, silver blades drawn, but Theron's guard moved to intercept them. Steel clashed against steel, the sound echoing through the vaulted ceiling like thunder. Lucian walked forward, unhurried, his crimson eyes never leaving Maelric. "You spoke of strength," he said, his voice carrying over the din. "Of glory, of vampire supremacy." He stopped at the base of the dais, staring up at the usurper who wore his crown. "But all I see is a coward who poisons wine and hides behind lies." Maelric descended the steps, his own eyes blazing with rage. "You were weak, Lucian. A king who pitied mortals. Who wants to give them rights?" He spat the word like poison. "You betrayed everything we are." "No." Lucian's voice was cold as winter. "I betrayed what you wanted us to remain. Monsters hiding behind crowns." Maelric lunged. The two vampires collided with inhuman speed, their movements blurring as they fought. Lucian was weakened from his wounds, but his fury gave him strength. He drove Maelric back, their fists connecting with bone-shattering force. They crashed through a banquet table, goblets and crystal exploding in a cascade of vitae and shattered glass. While they fought, Alara moved through the chaos toward the high table. Her silver eyes scanned the surface until she found it, a leather satchel hidden beneath Maelric's seat. She pulled it open, her hands trembling. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Forged decrees bearing Lucian's seal, ledgers detailing illegal slave trades to neighboring kingdoms, correspondence arranging the purchase of Veritas toxin, and at the bottom, wrapped in black velvet, the vial itself, half empty, its silver contents gleaming like liquid death. "Stop." Alara's voice cut through the hall. She held the vial high, and every eye turned to her. "This is what your new king offers you. Lies, murder, poison." Maelric broke away from Lucian, his face twisted with desperation. She's a traitor. A mortal sympathizer turned by a mad king. He pointed at Alara, his voice rising. She's the reason he's become weak. Kill her and you free him from her influence. Several nobles murmured in agreement. Alara felt their gazes on her. Predatory, calculating. She was the outsider, the mortal who didn't belong. The bond thrummed between her and Lucian, his alarm flooding through her veins. But she didn't step back. You want proof? She called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. These documents detail every crime Maelric has committed. Every forged order, every life sold, every lie told. She held up the ledger. He's been selling mortals to blood farms across the border. Children, families, while pretending to uphold your laws. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the most hardened nobles looked shaken. Maelric's expression darkened. Enough. He moved with supernatural speed, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His hand closed around Alara's throat, lifting her off the ground. You should have stayed in the shadows where you belonged. Let her go. Lucian's roar shook the hall. But Maelric's free hand produced a dagger, silver, wickedly sharp, and pressed it to Alara's chest. One more step, Maelric hissed, and I carve out her heart. And when she dies, so do you. Isn't that how your precious blood pact works? Lucian froze. Through the bond, Alara felt his terror, raw and overwhelming. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. But Alara wasn't afraid anymore. The hunger inside her, the power she'd been learning to control, surged to the surface. Her silver eyes blazed brighter. You're right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The bond means we share everything. She smiled, and there was nothing human in it, including strength. She moved faster than Maelric expected. Her hand shot up, grabbing his wrist and crushing it with inhuman force. He screamed, dropping the dagger. She twisted free of his grip and hurled the vial of Veritas toxin to the stone floor. It shattered, silver liquid hissing as it evaporated into harmless smoke. No! Maelric lunged for her, but Lucian was already there. He caught the Chancellor mid-stride, driving him to the ground. You wanted the old ways? Lucian said, his voice deadly calm. He looked up at the stained glass windows, at the fragments of crimson and gold. Then he raised his hand and spoke a word in the ancient tongue, a word that had not been uttered in centuries. The enchanted mirrors hidden throughout the cathedral, relics from the cathedral's construction, designed to magnify candlelight, began to move. They tilted, angled, redirecting the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. But Lucian's magic transformed it, concentrating it, amplifying it until it became something else entirely. Sunlight, artificial, burning, deadly. The beams lanced through the hall like spears of fire. Traitors screamed as light touched their skin, their bodies igniting like torches. Maelric scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to run. The light found him, and he shrieked as flames consumed his flesh. This is justice, Lucian said quietly, watching as the usurper burned to ash. When the light faded, only silence remained. The loyalists stood unharmed, shielded by Lucien's magic. But the traitors were gone, nothing but ash drifting through the cathedral like snow. Alara collapsed, her strength finally giving out. Lucian caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. Around them, the surviving nobles knelt, their heads bowed. Lucian looked down at the girl in his arms, this mortal who had saved him twice, who had changed everything. You've changed the course of eternity, he whispered. Alara's silver eyes fluttered open, a faint smile on her lips. Good, she breathed. It needed changing. The cathedral fell silent save for the soft whisper of ash settling on stone. Lucian remained kneeling beside Alara, her breathing steadying as the exertion of her transformation's power faded. Around them, the surviving nobles stayed bowed, uncertain whether to rise, uncertain what came next. The throne sat empty at the head of the hall, its dark wood gleaming in the flickering candlelight. Waiting, Captain Theron approached slowly, his sword sheathed, his expression reverent. Your Majesty, he said, his voice rough with emotion, the throne is yours. The traitors are ash. What are your orders? Lucienne looked up at him, then at the assembled court. So many faces, some loyal from the beginning, others who had wavered but survived the purge. They all watched him with a mixture of fear and hope, waiting for the king they had known to return, waiting for the old order to be restored. He helped Alara to her feet, keeping one hand on her arm to steady her. Then he turned to face his court, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 5 centuries, but also something new, something that had been forged in blood and desperation over the past 3 nights. I will not reclaim that throne, he said. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. Murmurs rose, confused and alarmed. Your Majesty, Theron began, but Lucian raised his hand. I will not reclaim it, he repeated. his crimson eyes sweeping across every face. Because the throne you expect me to take no longer exists. The kingdom I ruled for 5 centuries, built on fear, on subjugation, on the suffering of mortals. That kingdom died with Maelric's ashes. He stepped forward, moving toward the dais but not to ascend it. Instead, he stood before it, his back to the throne. For too long, we have told ourselves that power must come from dominance. That immortality gives us the right to rule over those whose lives are brief. That blood is ours to take, simply because we can. His voice hardened. I believed those lies. I built my reign on them, and I was wrong. Alara watched him, feeling the bond between them pulse with his conviction, his pain, his determination. This was the moment everything changed, not just for him, but for everyone. Tonight I declare a new covenant, Lucien said, his words ringing through the hall. No longer will blood be taken by force. Any mortal who provides vitae will do so willingly, with full consent, and will be compensated fairly. The blood farms will be dismantled. The slave trades will end, and any vampire who violates this law will face the same fate as those who tried to poison me. Ash on the wind. The nobles erupted in protest. Voices overlapped, some outraged, others fearful. "This is madness," one lord shouted. "We are predators. This is our nature." "Then change your nature," Lucien shot back, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Or be consumed by it. The old world is ending. Either evolve with it, or burn." The hall fell silent again, the weight of his words settling over them like a shroud. Then slowly, one figure rose from the crowd. An elderly vampire, her silver hair bound in braids, her face lined with centuries of wisdom. "Lady Seraphine, one of the oldest members of the court. And what of balance, your majesty?" she asked, her voice steady. "Who will ensure this covenant is honored? Who will stand between our kind and theirs, to prevent either side from breaking faith?" Lucien turned to Alara, and she felt every eye in the room follow his gaze. Her heart hammered, not from fear, but from the sudden understanding of what he was about to do. "She will," Lucien said. Alara's breath caught. "Lucien," he took her hand, pulling her forward to stand beside him. "Alara Vance, mortal-born, healer's apprentice. The girl who saved a king she had every reason to hate." He addressed the court, his voice filled with something that might have been pride. "She is neither fully mortal nor fully vampire. She is the bridge between our worlds, and she will be the first mortal-born member of the High Court, the Lady of Silver Veins, guardian of the new covenant." The nobles stared, some in disbelief, others in dawning understanding. It was unprecedented, radical, dangerous, perfect. "You cannot be serious," another voice called out. "Lord Vesper, a counselor known for his conservative views. A mortal? On the High Court? She has no experience, no lineage, no—" "She has saved my life twice," Lucien interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "She has more courage in her mortal heart than most of this court combined. And she carries my blood, bound to me by the oldest magic we know. If anyone questions her authority, they question mine." He turned to Alara, his crimson eyes searching hers. Through the bond, she felt his uncertainty, his hope, his fear that she would refuse. But she also felt his absolute faith in her. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "I know," he replied. "Neither did I 5 centuries ago. But we are here nonetheless. And together," he squeezed her hand, "together we can build something better than what came before." Alara looked out at the court, at faces that had regarded mortals as cattle, as food, as less than nothing. She thought of her mother, bleeding on the ground while vampires laughed. She thought of every human who had suffered under the old order, and she thought of the prophecy on the monastery wall. "The mortal flame will break the eternal night." "I accept," she said, her voice ringing clear. "But I will not be silent. I will not be a token. If I stand on this council, I speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, and I will hold every one of you accountable to this covenant." Slowly, deliberately, Lady Seraphine stepped forward and knelt. "Then I swear my oath to the Lady of Silver Veins, and to the new covenant." One by one, others followed. Captain Theron, then younger nobles who had grown weary of the old ways. Not all knelt, some turned and left the hall, unwilling to accept this new world. But enough remained. Enough to begin. As the last oaths were sworn, Lucien finally ascended the dais. But he did not sit on the throne. Instead, he stood beside it, offering his hand to Alara. She climbed the steps and stood with him, equal, united. "This covenant will not be easy," Lucien said to the assembled court. "There will be those who resist, those who fight to return to the old ways. But we will face them together, mortal and vampire, bound by something stronger than fear." He looked at Alara. "Bound by hope." The first rays of dawn began to creep through the shattered stained glass windows, painting the hall in shades of gold and rose. Vampires shifted uncomfortably, instinctively moving away from the light, but Lucian remained still, watching as the sun's glow grew stronger. "The world will hunt us," Alara murmured, feeling the warmth of dawn on her skin. "They'll call us traitors, heretics. They'll say we've betrayed both our kinds." Lucien's hand tightened around hers. Through the bond, she felt his resolve, unshakable, eternal. "Then let them," he replied. "We have already survived death. We have already broken every rule that mattered. What's a little more rebellion?" Despite everything, the exhaustion, the pain, the uncertainty of what came next, Alara smiled. "You know," she said, "3 nights ago, I was just a waitress trying to pay for winter firewood. And now? Now I'm standing in a cathedral at dawn, holding hands with a vampire king, about to change the world." She laughed, the sound bright and unexpected. "My brother is never going to believe this." Lucian's expression softened. The first genuine warmth she had seen from him. "Then we'll have to introduce you properly. As the Lady of Silver Veins." The sunlight grew stronger, streaming through the broken windows in shafts of pure gold. It touched the edge of the dais, creeping closer. Lucian didn't move. For the first time in 500 years, he stood still as dawn approached, unafraid. The light reached his boots, then his coat, then his face. It didn't burn, not yet. The enchantments woven into the cathedral's foundation had been designed to protect, not to harm. But still, the symbolism remained. The vampire king, standing in the light. Alara watched him, silver eyes meeting crimson in the glow of morning, their silhouettes framed against the dawn, the ancient immortal and the mortal girl, bound by blood and choice, and something that might, in time, become love. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Lucian looked out at the new world waiting beyond the cathedral doors. Uncertain, dangerous, filled with possibility. "Now," he said, "we begin." Behind them, the throne sat empty. Before them, the sun rose on the first day of the new covenant, and together they stepped forward into the light.